Hello, and welcome back to Parley. This one was paid for by PNGRZ. If you're not them, I hope you'll enjoy listening. Let's see what they have to say. PNGRZ wants some discussion about what they're calling minimum viable build crafting. How goes, Zandy? PNGRZ says, this month I'd like to discuss how we might move toward a minimum viable build crafting approach. I'm asking you to spend a bit of time build crafting about build crafting. On stream, we often hear you talk about multipliers in the context of making a build stronger. But what if we took it for granted that your build wasn't going to become meaningfully stronger, even if the devs suddenly added 10 more multipliers you could grab? Maybe in this game there aren't challenges that ask for said multipliers, large swaths of Warframe. The coughs are theirs, not mine. They continue, if you're at a point where no amount of build power will continue progressing the game, whatever that means in this game, what is there to optimize for in our shooty slashy or whatever games? Speed? Sure, but I think the dedicated speedrunning community will beat us there. Comfort? Fun? Cognitive load? Possibly all good starts, subjective in their own ways. How should we proceed to craft our building? Great question. Yes, this is something I've been working on myself as well. Up until this point, I have, well, maybe a couple of months ago, I have largely focused on the nuts and bolts of what you do to get a build to be effective, not because I didn't think anything else mattered, but because I felt like that was the only thing you can really share. And in this parlay, I'm going to I'll explain what I mean by that, why I'm kind of focusing more on, I think of it as focusing on fun, but on things other than doing enough damage now. And where I think there are a lot of problems. I like to keep something I feel like is a good takeaway at the beginning, just in case people aren't that interested in the whole thing. I think this one's going to be really good, but I'm still going to do it. I try to always do that. And so I think the first reaction I had was for some types of people, I think that the term build or build crafting might be oversimplifying the things they like. And some people who find it not entertaining anymore to optimize for damage, the problem for them is that what they want is getting the most of a thing. So if the game doesn't offer that, or that stops being meaningful, they don't really enjoy that. And I would argue that that kind of isn't something a build system does. Build systems, I would argue, are actually not good for fulfilling that desire. And it's a subtle difference that I think is not as well understood as would benefit us. Something I'm very interested in right now. So that's my sort of answer initially. The term build or build crafting is something I've got a lot of trouble with. I feel like we kind of need a term for what this thing we're talking about is, where you customize your play style, kind of adapt the game a bit to your tastes or interests, sort of that thing. We kind of know what we mean when we say that to each other, but also sort of don't. And I think there's real complexity to be unpacked in that subject. So this is a great question. There's a lot to say. I'm going to try to tackle it the way I described before. So let me explain what I was doing up till this point. I think that's a good starting point. Then I want to get into maybe reasons you would make builds a certain way, kind of address that thing I said a minute ago, why maybe some people wouldn't find it satisfying to just make something they like. When other people say, well, why don't you just make a build you enjoy? Why does that miss the mark for some people? Why some people that you're kind of talking past them? But it seems like, why would that not be good advice? Just do what you enjoy, right? I don't think that's what they were finding fun. And so anyway, we'll dig into that more too. And then at the end, I have a few more. Okay, it'll feel related once we get there. First up is my whole thing about why I've covered games the way I have. Yes, a lot of the words over the course of the time that I've spoken on the internet about making builds in games have been words that were about making your build do enough damage so you don't have to worry about that in the name of you doing whatever else you want. But I think that was misguided, because a lot of these games, that it really is quite simple. it's almost misguided, I think, to not tell a player, here's just the build that I think would make that weapon do good damage, or the combination of stats that might make this character do good damage, or whatever. If you're trying to encourage them to try something they might find more interesting, because in a lot of games, the thing where there is just a single answer isn't a place you're really meant to make like a meaningful choice. That is sort of something you get out of the way, and then the question becomes, where is the build making? Where is the fun that they put in? I'd imagined it as in Warframe, for example. I could help people understand how you'd get good multipliers on builds, and then they could pick, I guess, what weapons they would like with whatever Warframe they liked. Or in Genshin Impact, I could help people understand the mathematical reasons why you might want to evenly mix the multipliers that affect your character's damage. And I spend a lot of words on that because it's such an incredibly powerful tool. It lets you basically optimize anything without needing to do any math. Well, only basic addition, let's say it that way. You can abstract the math in pretty much any game and kind of get that out of the way. If that could be something people could understand, they would never need to ask, what do I put on blankety blank character ever again? So to me, it felt like it's worth a lot of time. You see what I mean? And if you don't see what I mean by how could you possibly abstract the math of every single game all at once? No, you can't do that. Some people might be thinking. I'm not sure we totally have time, but I'll try to circle around to it. Just the idea is simply that if you evenly mix the multipliers the game offers, and the game is well balanced, which isn't always true, but you can often assume those things, you will get enough damage to complete the game's level of difficulty. Games that give you choices for those things and balance those choices reasonably, it almost automatically, mathematically, you will get good damage by mixing them evenly, and that will be enough damage for the challenges in the game. If you don't feel like mathematically that makes sense, I hope you can accept that it's been my experience that that is the case, even if I didn't know why, but I think I do know why. We'll leave it at that. So I'm definitely going to expound on that in future videos. There should be a video, I've tried to make some in the past, that adequately explain that concept. I've sort of done it in Warframe. There's a video that might still be up, I think. I hope. I thought that video was okay. Called One Build to Rule Them All. And the idea was that, but it was limited to Warframe. And once I eventually make, I think, a better video that talks about it in game design broadly, I will probably take that video down, or I'll make it unlisted in a playlist. That's what people have asked for whenever I say take a video down. Okay, so I previously focused on that. Why not now? Why am I not focusing on it now? There's a lot of reasons. One reason is that at different points in play in these types of games, Warframe is a fine example here, you don't need to do that, or there's no meaning in doing that. You're spending a lot of time learning something that doesn't really help. You could just put on the mods you have, and they'll do, you either don't really need modded damage, or it should be pretty obvious that Serration, the mod with the biggest number on it, probably increases your damage the most. And do we really need to take people's time talking about that? I'm not sure that's the most helpful thing. It might be better to just encourage people to copy a build at that point. And a lot of people, I think, actually have a lot more trouble in practice with exactly the thing Pingers is asking here. Where is my choice in the puzzle? Or if I don't find it interesting to optimize for damage, because it ends up being pretty easy in a lot of these games, purposefully, I think, easy, what might I enjoy optimizing? What is it even useful to optimize for? And spending my time talking more about, it might not seem like building this way is that valuable, but I actually think it is really valuable here. Or now that you've got this damage, I think it can be really fun and potentially very useful to build this really odd thing that you may not have known existed, or you might have thought of it. It's this basic, readily available thing, but you might not have used it here. That, I think, is more in the name of people making choices that suit their preferences. You follow me on that part so far? So here's where we get to, I think, Pinger's question and the sort of fork in the road I described at the beginning of the parlay. I think that part of the problem is that at this point, once you've kind of got the basic damage, because it's honestly not that hard, you can in a game like Warframe just copy people's builds. And while that's not necessary, because I think it's understandable how you just universally get good damage on a build, it's certainly not difficult. And so, then you've got that stuff. And there you go. Your weapons do good damage. You've picked, I don't know, weapons that people said do good damage, or you understood the fundamental math that means that these weapons will generally do good damage, however it happened. And you're now at a fork in the road. I think for a while I've acted as if a lot of people seem to be in the same boat at this point, but they're probably not. Again, I think for now, let's make at least two categories, but a big theme of this parlay is I think we should make more. There's at least two kind of conflicting desires here. The desire to maximize something, that's what I'm going to call it for now, but I might change the name even in this parlay, and the desire to assert preference. And they might sound similar. It might just be boring or pointless. Just see, the build that does enough damage that everybody has. But what the maximizer would want to see instead, or what would satisfy them, isn't the same as what the preference asserter, I forgot what I just called them, but the preferer. How about that? That's so awkward, but whatever. Too bad. The preferer, the preferencer. That's easier to say. How about that? And they're both incredibly stupid, so that's good enough. The maximizer may hear you say, well, now that I've got enough damage, I think it's just fun to use, like, insert a totally random weapon here. The preferencer might think that's so bad that that's fine, of course. Oh, you find it fun there because, it's got this nice sort of gameplay flow to it. Cool, that's exactly what I was looking for. The maximizer will see really no point in that. You might as well have picked a random weapon. They might feel like, well, hold on, I mean, like, what's even the point of making builds in this game if you don't need anything in particular? I'm not quite sure how they'd formulate it, because this isn't me. I'm definitely the preferencer, if you have to say it that way. Although I think there's probably a third thing that I am that we're going to get to in a few minutes. Not that these are set archetypes like genetic material, just that it may be useful to divide the desires people want fulfilled into buckets. And of course, lots of people will want a mix of them. I think the maximizing thing is interesting to a point. I definitely don't find it as entertaining as some people do, but I'm not completely disinterested in getting, every little bit of whatever. If you've watched the streams a lot, which Pingers has, you'll know that occasionally I say, like, I just want the most range on this melee weapon, or I decided to have this character just be built for the most damage because I feel that is the use of that character that is the most valuable in context. We'll get to that later. It's not like I'm never interested in that. Sure, people are not just going to be one thing or the other, of course. It's really never helpful to categorize things that way. But I do think that having a different concept for what each of those appeals is useful. This is what I meant at the beginning when I said that I think build crafting, or making a build, is kind of rounding off or oversimplifying away complexity that explains why some people aren't satisfied with certain things. Does that make sense? Again, we'll keep going. Hopefully it will over time. Some way I'll tackle this will work for everyone, I hope, by the end. Where were we? So we were on the topic of how there might be quite a few things that would be fulfilling. At this point, I think I want to give some other examples. So Slay the Spire is a game that I enjoyed a lot for a little while. And I left feeling like I wouldn't say I enjoyed Slay the Spire now. What happened? What's going on? Well, after I played enough Slay the Spire, and it's been a long time, this may have changed, by the way. I doubt it, but it may have changed. I felt that I realized, or at least it really seemed like this to me, you can never know for sure, but it really seemed like this to me, and many other people in reviews of the game who've played it a long time have felt the same way. So it's hard to believe it really isn't that way and we just all missed something. There is kind of just the strategy at the end of Slay the Spire. Once you understand the game well enough, it sort of emerges that, oh yeah, you can basically, combos are the rule of the day. You can either make a deck that draws the combo every time and kills everything right away, or a deck that stacks defense or shields, I forget what they're called, um, to become invulnerable for a long time while carefully setting up a combination that will suddenly trigger and blow up the fight. Something like that. You can make like a grindier strategy too, but the point is, there's really, I felt like, one or two strategies that are all the characters kind of orbit around. There is a sort of way of playing that is kind of the right way. A single deck isn't going to be like the only thing worth making. Fact aside that you can't even do that because Slay the Spire gives you random cards as you go. But there's really no significance, I didn't feel, once I got to the end of Slay the Spire, in like choosing what strategy you want to make. This one is just the best 100% of the time. The question is, will you be able to make it in that amount of time? And if you can't, is there something you can cobble together that kind of stems the bleeding? But my experience was that it largely won't be good enough. You can't really win doing that. That was my experience. I am not the world's foremost expert on Slay the Spire. It's just an example. If you think Slay the Spire is different, please just forget it as an example and focus on the concept. I think to summarize, that the game was really a puzzle rather than whatever I want out of a build system. Let's not bite off more than we can chew here. I guess I don't really like puzzles. I frequently do like puzzles, but this type of game that appears to have build options, but is actually kind of just let's call it a puzzle box, actually. I think that evokes the concept better. For the purpose of this video, a puzzle box, where at the end, once you've moved the pieces enough and kind of got to bearings with what it is, there is like a way you solve it. And you may be able to solve it other ways, but there's not much of a reason to, other than styling on the game, which that could be a thing. I don't personally care about that at all. You could do as a stunt, you could complete the game differently. But if it's you in the game and no one else is gonna see, some of those people might still care about doing a stunt. But anyway, you get the point. A puzzle box thing. Now, you can definitely maximize things different ways. It's not like you do it the same way every time. If you want to maximize something, I kind of feel like Slay the Spire does that kind of well, I think. Your choices don't matter the way I'm interested in them mattering, which is that there really is no answer. You just have to choose, and then you get various results depending on what choices you made. It doesn't really do that. It's not about that. There's not loads of interesting choices you could make that are all around the same amount of good. Usually there's very few or no choices that are really anywhere near as good as like the correct one. Again, that doesn't mean it's bad or anything, but that's not what I want. Likewise, in Warframe, one reason Warframe works for me as a building exercise is that the game doesn't ask you to use all of the places you can make a choice to get like enough damage. It's kind of easy enough to get that out of the way for me that I can just pick what I'd like with the other space. And it's not that all the options are so equal as much as kind of what PNGRZ said in the beginning. It's more like it's just meaningless to gain anything else at that point, and so you might as well just gain whatever you want. It's not that, after I have enough damage to kill the enemies in 1 second with all of my weapons. It's not like all of the Warframe powers I could engineer to help me with that are all as good as each other. It's more like I just don't need any anyway, and so you could just do whatever you'd like. They're also quite different. They don't really do the same thing at all. And so if I brought Necros and I make a lot more loot from that fight, it's kind of hard to say that that is better or worse than something that kills the enemies a lot faster or makes my damage hit more enemies at once. Those are kind of just different benefits. If I could have cleared the mission either way, it's not eminently clear which of those things was really better. Neither of them benefited me in one sense. But you could optimize for various things to get into that part of the parlay. So as PNGRZ said, I'm going to read that part again, actually. You said, if you are at a point where no amount of build power will continue progressing the game, whatever that means, what is there to optimize for in our shooty slashy games? Speed, sure, but I think the dedicated speedrunning community will beat us there. Remember that. Comfort, fun, cognitive load, possibly all good starts, but subjective in their own ways. The way that you said speed, but I think the dedicated speedrunning community will beat us there, makes me think of that maximizing appeal. I don't know if that's what appeals to you, but that wording reminded me of an example of that maximizing appeal. I could say, why does it matter if the speedrunning community is faster? You can still optimize as best you can for speed. For example, you could get missions done faster without losing damage as efficiently as possible, given your limited skill. You could think of it that way. I do that. I do that. It's fun. We called it drift frame and did it a bunch, and I like it. But for some people, it feels pointless because you're kind of purposefully doing something that's less than as good as it could be because it makes sense now, but later it might make sense to do things differently, or it isn't. That would be like practicing a sport in a way that is good against playing against players of your skill level only, but then you're well aware that when you get to higher skill levels of players probably won't fall for that, but you practice that would seem weird to some people, partially because it's a competitive activity. But I think that's really fun. I love that. I would call that maybe improvising or like very short term practicing. Adapting isn't a bad word, maybe. Not the word I'm going to use here as a counterpoint is training, maybe, which I dislike. I like changing, but I don't like changing during that time interval. I think that's the difference. And yeah, I think that Warframe generally may not fulfill that very well. There's for various reasons. There's a lot of choices that just don't really make that more interesting in Warframe. You'd have to unlock a lot of stuff to basically get to the point where you are simply speedrunning. Why not just play a game where you don't have any build choices to get out of the way and then you speedrun, you know? People who like speedrunning in Warframe might have various reasons. For some of them, they are interested in the various little choices you can make. They might have a healthy dose of that preferencer thing mixed in, and so they're interested in how you are kind of speedrunning like in those other games. But you can kind of customize the tool you're using to speedrun. I guess I can understand why that would appeal to someone, sure. But you can understand that if someone didn't care about that, it's confusing, not clearly a good choice to pick Warframe to speedrun in as opposed to anything else, really. Something where you don't have to unlock as much stuff to be fast. Also, the Hellman thing that makes you temporarily faster, but only for a little while on one specific Warframe in Warframe seems like it might be frustrating for speedrunning. That's just my uninformed point of view. Maybe those folks think that system is cool or hate it even more than I think they would. I don't know. But does that make sense? I think that the actionable piece of advice that's emerging here is really game selection more than what the player should do. Like if we could find a way to express what Warframe is gonna allow you to pick for what costs in terms of your time or like building up resources, then you would go into Warframe knowing that it will fulfill preferences that I guess you'd also have to know which ones you had. And if you do that, if you can do both those things, then you probably won't be left wondering, like, what should we even do at the end of the game? When you say, what is there to optimize for in our shooty slashy games, Pingers? If we adequately understand what you mean by what is there to optimize for, and what the shooty slashy games are allowing the player to do whatever with, manipulate, optimize for, you won't need to ask that question. That's my hope at the moment. My goal with my videos that I'm currently making on the ZanyPants YouTube channel is to cause that scenario to come about, to create videos in such a way that, not just you, by the way, like I as well, both of us, do not need to ask that question. Basically, we will have learned so thoroughly what we mean by, when I want to make certain build choices, what do I even want here exactly? More specifically, what do I want? And also what games do those things. and what are good signs that a game does those things, to the point that I won't be left wondering what to, manipulate in the games I'm playing. I won't wonder, what do I do with this system? I will play a game that only does with that system the thing I want, I guess. Either that, I will make a game that only does that thing. I'm saying this and thinking to myself, and probably no games will exist that do that thing. And then we're going to do some game development, I suppose, aren't we? But and so we shall. I mean, I am working on that right now, actually. It's just going to be done in a few years, not in a few months. Right. Okay. Well, that was confident of me. I don't feel confident, by the way. Let me talk about some confusions that I have, like why I don't really have a great answer for a methodology here as per se. I have a plan. I told you what I'm doing, I guess, trying to do to make that the case. Enough discussion about what appeals to people in various ways, or what a game systems are doing, coupled with enough examples of games that do various of those things, may be enough. And so that's currently what I'm doing. I guess I could say a simple solution for now would be, if you just try more games within reason, but carefully scout those games. Don't just try anything you come across that you have the time and money. You could just try a bunch of stuff, but a skill that's worth cultivating here is basically reviewing the game for yourself, kind of without playing it. Otherwise, it will take an impractical amount of time in the long run. You could watch some footage of the gameplay. I've become recently very frustrated with reviews that I otherwise like for example, Yahtzee Croshaw for The Escapist, Zero Punctuation. This is something people know about. I think it's pretty popular. I like those reviews overall because I think that they do a good job of being one of the two kinds of reviews in my mind. Those kinds of reviews being personal reviews, where you kind of triangulate your own taste using the reviewer's taste, and let's call them objective reviews. Some people act like you kind of can't make these. I think you really can, but people just kind of don't. A lot of time, an objective review of a game, you're better served by actually just reading about game design of that game. So like watching another channel shout out, we're apparently doing that, Game Maker's Toolkit. If there's a video all about a game you're interested in playing, watching that video is maybe closer to an objective category review. It's not objective, but it talks about parts of the game that are there. It's not really about how the game made the person feel or what parts they enjoyed or not. It really focuses on mechanically, literally, what can you do, that kind of thing. You could definitely make reviews really embracing that idea. I would argue people just sort of don't usually. Most reviews are this sort of triangulation thing. I have heard some reviewers who do that personal type of review claim that you can't make the other type of review, which I believe is clearly wrong. People more or less have made the other type of review. You absolutely can, sure. It's just hard, I guess. It takes a lot of time. People are bad at it. People don't wish to, because it means they don't really focus on saying what they thought. Nothing wrong with that, but I don't agree that it's like not possible. I don't know. That's a weird claim. Anyway, but I've heard people say that. So anyway, the Yahtzee Croshaw reviews, Zero Punctuation, doesn't have gameplay of the game, which I think makes those reviews unusually weak for the purpose I'm discussing in this video. A lot of reviews are very personal focused, but showing gameplay and game systems is kind of inching toward the kind of objective review category. More stuff like that would probably get you closer to making a good decision. Watching unedited, uncommentated if possible, gameplay of the game is a great start. I frequently will go on Twitch. I'll mute my phone or my computer and go on Twitch or YouTube and look up just straight gameplay of the game, block gameplay of a game I'm going to play. And again, even if there is any sound, I just mute it and watch it for a little bit and try to see, when they go to a menu, what is the menu? Why? When does the action stop? And you can see how If we did this a lot, we could develop a good strategy for what you do to determine this about games. And if that became popular enough, people would begin to include language in their reviews that would reference those concepts because they would be effective. They'd be a survival of the fittest thing, and they would become things people would ask for. The reviewer would then see it as a way to add value to their review, and they'd be in reviews. You could imagine a world where if I and similar minded people are successful enough, we basically won't have this issue anymore. There will be language attached to games that will help you add those details in. Or so I would say, if not for how I'm going to conclude this parlay. You remember I said there's something I want to say, but it won't make sense till we get there? This might have seemed unrelated at first, but it's the problem, I think. I would say that would all be great, but it won't work, and the reason is that it'll be co-opted as a marketing term. Which brings me to the final part of this parlay, things getting co-opted as marketing terms. Build systems have this problem way more than I realize they do. Mostly in AAA video games that I've often argued to people, you should just expect this not to be that good. Like, why are you even interested in this game? But they have a lot of marketing, and most players will not reject that influence, and so I've got to have some way to address it. So yeah, we're going to talk about it. A lot of very popular, very heavily marketed games that are very safe investment properties. I would argue they're really not made motivated by fun. They're motivated by triangulating a word cloud of fun ideas and then making a very safe, predictable version of them, which will definitely make money, but is not noteworthy to anyone at all. That's my extremely harsh review of of popular games culture, but it's not like they're all bad, and that's the trouble, isn't it? There are some really interesting game systems, like it or hate it. Think it's good or full of holes. I think it's full of holes. But Genshin Impact, for example, is a very popular game that has an undeniably interesting build system, game mechanic system, which is a little inexplicable. It's like weirdly good for that level of marketing. It's weirdly fun. Really is what I'm trying to say. When I say good, it's fun. To a lot of people, it has an odd amount of complexity. It's not perfect at all. It's sort of better than you'd think it needs to be for the shareholders, you know. But if you make enough games, some of them are going to be like that. The problem I'm getting a little bit distracted, is that games nowadays often say customize your playstyle with these 3, it turns out they're actually totally meaningless, upgrade trees. You know, the game's build systems aren't good, but technically all the pieces of the games that I'm saying I like are there. They're just really, really usually weak. It's usually they're just very small. The system is usually not small. This is this game where you get every single enemy drops a piece of equipment you can equip, but they all give you like 3% poison resistance. That's what I'm talking about, you know? Loot doesn't matter literally at all in these games. It almost never has any real merit, but it's there because it was determined to be good for marketing. And the problem, I think, is that when a game advertises those systems, you can't really know whether they're good without playing way too much of that game. Because, 1, a lot of games have really interesting game balance, but not until later in the game's lifespan. The developers didn't spend the time balancing every single moment in your progression during the game, but they did do a lot of work balancing the end of your progression, and that state might be good enough, given poor enough choices, which is, I think, where we are in the industry right now, that you might want to get to that point and then enjoy the balance, which becomes good once you get there. You see what I mean? A lot of massively multiplayer online role-playing games do this. World of Warcraft doesn't have balance that makes that much sense until you are max level or high level. I remember when I played World of Warcraft, the original World of Warcraft, like 20 years ago now, I did this thing where Battlegrounds, you would go in with characters that had the same gear they normally did adventuring. So you could take gear from the outside world and bring it into a battleground. And they were by level bracket. So it would go 10 to 19, 20 to 29, etc. We would do this thing where you'd purposefully keep a character at the lowest possible bracket, but the highest possible level, so level 19. they have the biggest advantage over everyone else in that bracket. They're the highest level relative to the bracket. And then you get them the best gear that you could manage to get at level 19. You also have to be careful about leveling up. That was another weird thing. At the time, you couldn't like turn off leveling up, so you had to be quite careful you didn't just randomly over level yourself and then all the work was gone as soon as you hit level 20. And you would get gear that would be really, really good, way too good, unfairly good for level 19, because why would the game developers have balanced for only level 19 being really good? You know what I mean? They kind of didn't do that. And so you could gain a big advantage over other players, but other people were doing this too. So you'd kill like 5 people on the enemy team, but then the enemy team's guy who was doing that would come up and you'd have a, like, oh, I see you. And you'd hit him with an attack and he wouldn't immediately die. And you'd both be like, oh, it's on now. And then everybody just watches while the two of you fight and, casually kill 3 people with an errant blow. And it was a whole situation, a very badly game design situation, but it will forever stick in my memory. Because why would it not have been possible to do that? Why would they have put so much effort into balancing? What, were they going to assume players would do literally anything they thought of doing? Come on, And so a lot of games that have every intention of having interesting balance, just understandably, it's just not really possible for them to be balanced at every point in players' progression. That's thing number one. Why are so many of them, like, it's unclear whether they're going to be balanced or not? Number two, no one knows all builds. This one is simple. You just can't understand a game's build systems completely on your own, no matter who you are. It's just not really possible. Even people who are the most experienced at games that have, I would argue, pretty depthy build systems are hilariously biased for the experiences they've had. If you listen to, I'm not going to say a specific person's name, but if you look up people who play a lot of Hades, for example, their build recommendations are hilariously skewed in like a few directions. They are not even remotely a person who understands the whole of the game's build styles. They have one way they've decided makes sense to play, and they can't just magically become a different person. I feel like I'm being overly harsh on them. And so, of course, like they don't really know the reality of the game's build systems either. No matter how much any one person plays, I think you essentially can't know that if the game has sufficient complexity that build choices are interesting. Even the developers likely don't know, but probably that's the closest you could get. A determined developer could painstakingly develop every single build tool in a game and try to think of every single possible iteration, watch players, get data from players, and see every single possible iteration of that game piece used in builds. And that person, if they were very determined and really paid a lot of attention and took a lot of notes, might be close to understanding the sort of the actual meta game of a game that they themselves developed and know everything about. But even then, it's hard. Like, that's a lot of different perspectives. And personal skill comes into play too, right? You've got to be able to operate certain play styles. You have to just have a predisposition to certain things. I remember me playing Hades. Some people have commented, "You're so aggressive when you play Hades." And I thought, I am, aren't I? Like, I didn't really notice that, but I am, I suppose. I tend to push forward. I play it like Doom for whatever reason. And many people don't play Hades that way, and I don't really know why. I could venture some guesses, but yeah. So thing number two, even if you play an infinite amount of the game, one person can never really. It's shocking how unhelpful even an infinitely experienced player of a game can be, as long as their perspective is really just their own. I think that the experience is almost useless for these types of games. You're just going to become very biased. Things that work will be hard to ignore. And point number three, a lot of the time these games either get updated or the very reality of their balance is changed over the course of the game's development or lifespan. There are games where what makes sense in the game just isn't the same after a while. For example, before we had the Steel Path in Warframe, it was all kinds of unnecessary to do the level of damage that you could easily do at the time. when the steel path came out at that moment, it didn't become possible to do that much more damage. But doing that amount of damage did become somewhat more relevant to the game, in that there at least were rewards offered for killing enemies of that level, right? So you could argue that at that moment, Warframe changed kind of from a game where you really could make basically whatever you wanted, and most weapons could be buffed up to do plenty of damage against the relevant enemies. But then suddenly it changed to a game where there are still plenty of weapons that do adequate damage, but it's a lot more of a narrow field than it was, and getting enough damage means something very different, day after that update goes live. If that makes sense. Again, just an example. You may or may not have had that experience. So all in all, I don't think that it's really possible to detect whether a game will have good build systems. If terms that accurately define that become popular, the moment they become popular, they will become increasingly useless with every passing day as they're misused for marketing purposes. Now, of course, kind of like I was trash talking the AAA games industry earlier, you can kind of mitigate this by just expecting those games to be not that fun, because they're not, in my opinion. They're impressive. If you don't have really anything you're looking for in games, especially not making builds, they probably do that the worst. And so as long as you just want a cinematic experience, that might be really good. Although I'd argue you can do a lot with some of the lighter development money offerings in the world. Hollow Knight has a lot of very cinematic moments, maybe just not as, I don't know, loud, I guess. It's okay if people prefer that. Sure, I guess that's hard to do without a lot of money. They're not good at nothing, AAA games. And I'm just hand waving here, of course. Like, some of them are great. And of course it won't be all of them. But I do feel like the mental shortcut of kind of expecting those games to be not what you're looking for, if you like lots of build options, is a good one. They probably won't be. Why would they be? It takes a huge amount of effort to only appeal to let's imagine everyone who likes every type of playing video games is an even slice of the pie. Making good build systems is one of the most development intensive things to add to your game for what probably isn't a notably large part of the pie, right? It's probably a notably small part of the pie. And so you would imagine that's not that big, but you can do it very poorly, very easily. And so you might be able to bait players in like that. Sure. Just a few other closing notes. That seems like it got really away from what you're asking, which is what do we even optimize for? And I was going to spend the parlay talking a lot about, I think cognitive load is a really interesting thing to optimize for. Making a loadout that is designed to be less mentally taxing or more mentally taxing, depending on the gameplay experience you want, is valuable. Understanding what things are valuable what ways, or just finding more things that can be valuable, cognitive load, comfort, fun, speed, and more, and trying to make something that does all of those things as well as possible relative to each other is kind of what I like. And I'm not sure if you want a different name for that. A generalistifier, maybe. But that's bad. I don't know exactly. But something like that is, I would say, what I prefer. I want to find if something gives a notable gain in speed for very little opportunity cost. I want that. Not because it gives me the most speed or a lot of speed, but because it's a good deal, I guess, in terms of power budget. I want the most powerful overall loadout made up of things that are powerful in completely different ways. Just that gives an overall strong gameplay showing, a robust gameplay showing, maybe you'd say. The average player picking it up would find whatever it is they cared about relatively catered to. And so the aggregate score of every single person rating my loadout in the entire world would be the highest score of anyone's loadout. But no individual player would love it except me, which sounds bad, but it is for me after all. And it's not that I want to impress people. I care about essentially all things that players have introduced to me over the years. When people make me aware of or I become aware of, oh yeah, I could optimize for cognitive load, I go, yep, I want that too. I'm just the greediest person alive in terms of that kind of making builds. So a lot of it is a good answer. I personally think that a lot of this is about finding the right games, but my takeaway for what to do yourself, I guess, would be to understand what things you value and why, and then to consider that perhaps the game isn't trying to be good at optimizing that thing. I also feel like it's good closing advice to keep in mind that developers they had an idea in mind for what the game would be good at delivering, but I don't think a lot of people are digging into this subject. Like, I doubt most developers have had a specific conversation about what build making fantasy, what type of fulfillment in making build decisions they want the game to deliver to their player. So, in all likelihood, the game will pick an odd compromise on what it lets you do, probably because it kind of didn't directly choose exactly what its stance is going to be on that thing. And I don't think that's bad or foolish or negligent of the developer. That it's kind of expected because people don't talk about this that much. I, a person who says I love this thing, don't even really have words that I think accurately convey the thing I want. I'm not exactly sure what it is. I believe this thing to be in its infancy as a scholarly subject. It's not something I feel like is understood well enough for great discourse to take place. And my goal is largely to get there, get to the starting line of that thing. In 20 years, we're going to be, you and I both together, we're going to be developing these crazy build making games that have all sorts of great systems in place for doing that stuff. And you won't play lots of games that intend to be good at that, that just lack what I would call basic features for the genre. They will be more targeted. They will be trying to deliver a specific experience. They won't just be kind of what's there. You could say that the thing I want to buildcraft about buildcrafting is the understanding of buildcrafting. I want to optimize the subject itself, not any specific quality. I feel like a lot of most games that offer build options are delivering the thing they do best in a very suboptimal way. Like, they could be making the people who like that thing much happier. They could trim the fat on gameplay elements that just don't add enough for their cost. Or they satisfy one kind of player that overall won't really enjoy this game, but it does appeal to that type of player. And finally, I feel like I've come down very strong against popular games in this. It really was just a shorthand. But I want to emphasize why I did that. And it's because I think a lot of those developers are not motivated by necessity enough by fun. They need to make money. That's okay. People can make money making a game. But the game I'd expect to be the most fun is a game made by an individual who has simply decided that they are going to make the game fun at the expense of all else. And they'll find a way to get the game into people's hands. But the game's number one priority is fun. They're not going to sacrifice major fun in the name of money, basically. Or if a game is designed in a way where you want to buy an experience booster for it, for example, that's too big of a cost to pay for my ideal developer, I guess. And I've played games where that is the case, and I hate that part of them. But so few games don't do that I feel like at this point in time, it's just impractical to avoid, all of those. So anyway, okay, I think that is the last thing I have to say. I hope I helped a little bit. I don't have amazing direct answers for kind of what to optimize for. So I hope this discussion felt relevant to your subject. It was a challenging but really good one. This has been a big focus of mine for the past 6 months or so, and will continue to be. So thank you for asking. Great timing.